Welcome to What's New. This is a podcast coming live from the New Society, and our goal is to sit down with members of the New Society to explore new ideas, to explore what's next, or just to have a damn good conversation. I am excited to be here with my longtime friend, Michelle Johnston, who is not only a professor at Loyola, but also an author of The Seismic Shift. And we're going to talk about what we typically talk about when we meet each other in the park, walking around just brainstorming. So first, Michelle, welcome.
Thank you so much, Tim. I'm really excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
Well, thank you for being here. We're going to dive right in. You wrote this book called Seismic Shift, and it was around the value of human connection. And the one story that spoke to me amongst many of them, because you interviewed and talked to about local leaders, was a story about Drew Brees and what Drew did with his teammates every year. Do you mind talking about that?
Yeah, I loved hearing about how Drew Brees led in the locker room and outside of the locker room. And one of the best practices that I learned is he would start the training season off with every single person on his offense, no matter if he knew they would be on the training, the practice squad, whether they would be cut or whether he would be a multi-million dollar fined. And when it comes to contract negotiations, that didn't matter to Drew Brees. What mattered was every single person was treated the same, and he'd bring out an old school spiral notebook with a pen, and he would interview each one of them in the very beginning, and he would want to know their personal goals, and he'd write them down, and their professional goals. And then he would share with them, let me tell you what my personal goals are. I want to be the best husband I can be to Brittany, and here's what I'm working on this year. I want to be the best dad I can be to my 4 kids, and here's specifically what I'm working on this year. Will you help me? And then professionally, here's what I want to do with the offense. Specifically, will you help me? I'm committed to you, and I want you to be committed to me. And then he would follow up about usually every month he'd follow up. And that was truly a best practice in connection, because it made his teammates feel like, again, no matter if they ended up on the practice squad or one of the best receivers, they mattered.
What does what does that tell you about him, and what does that tell you about human connection? What was he doing that you read into?
So, what I learned from Drew is that he was a true servant leader. He felt that his job was not just to be the best quarterback on the offense, but his job was to develop his people and to serve his people. So every day when he got up, he first worked on him, and he was obviously very regimented in his health and his exercise and what he ate in order to perform at the maximum highest level. And he took it very seriously that his job was to make sure to develop his people. That's servant leadership.
So you were here last week at the opening of our season, and how AI can strengthen human connection. And you said something which I think was very bold, and I'd love to go deeper in it, that New Orleans could be great at this, or New Orleans could be the best in the world. Do you mind? Why do you think New Orleans is good at connecting, or what do you see?
I would love to share an example with you that I have never shared with anybody. And I think it really illustrates why I believe that this city is best in class when it comes to connection. I remember it was right when the pandemic was lifted, and all of a sudden we didn't have masks on. And I remember being in the fresh market right down the street from here, shopping. And I'm not much of a cook at all, but I was trying. And I'm in line to pick out a fresh piece of salmon, and there's a bunch of us waiting, and all of a sudden this robust conversation happens about, how do you cook your salmon? Wait, I do this and I do that. And I'm just soaking it up, listening to all these people. Really, they're passionate about salmon, and I'm like taking notes because I'm not a good cook. And one of the women, she walks out of, and I was like, okay, great, thank you so much. She walks out a fresh market. The next thing I know, she races back in and she said, honey, I forgot to tell you, you got to put honey on top. That's the secret sauce, honey on top. And as she left, I thought, this is one of the reasons why New Orleans is so great at connection. we talk to one another. We talk to one another in supermarkets. We talk to one another in the park. One of the things to our listeners of this podcast is Tim and I would see each other in the park. We've lived in the same neighborhood forever. We've raised kids forever. They've gone to the same school. And we would just see each other in the park. And there were times when it was very obvious that Tim had earbuds in and he was listening to something, but it didn't matter. If I had an idea that I wanted to talk with him about, I would like shake him and I'd say, Tim, take your earbuds out. Let's talk about this. And we would then take a lap together in the park. There's something about this city, whether it's the supermarket, and we'll dive more into our rituals, or whether it's in the park, there's something about this community that I think really embraces and encourages all of us as community members to talk to one another.
So let's act like we're in the park, because we actually saw each other in the park the other day, and you were with a friend, and it's like, I had this idea and I want to go into it, but you were with a friend. So let's act like we're in the park. Let's walk around, and I want to throw an idea about, because you said, it made me think about New Orleans is the best at it. And I started thinking about, okay, how are we the best at it? So let's have a conversation. Let's take two models, the Jazz Fest model and the Mardi Gras model. So Jazz Fest is an annual ritual where 12 different stages of different music all come together, and all these different people connect in this ritualistic way around music and culture. And it's organized by Quint Davis, puts together the calendar. The organized connection. And then you have Mardi Gras, the decentralized, right? Where everyone's sort of doing it on their own thing, but somehow we connect. So we're looking at these two different models of the organized connective versus the disorganized, or centralized, decentralized. So I've been thinking about these two models. So I would love to sort of get your intellectual mind as well as your academic mind. Is there something in that we can learn from about these two institutions, which have been going on for 50, perhaps 100 years, engages locals, but attracts the world, but somehow it's connected our diverse community to come together for a certain reason? So throwing that out there as we're walking around St. Charles Avenue, kicking down left towards Magazine.
Absolutely. And I've thought about this too, Tim, because so many of the conversations we've had, as a matter of fact, you and I coined the phrase together, ritual and rhythm. And I talk about that a lot when I think about what does make New Orleans better. And I've lived in a lot of cities than most when it comes to connection. And I think if you look at it from the lens of rituals, we have so many festivals and so many rituals that are embedded into our annual rhythm. So New Orleanians know that every year it might fall on different weeks and sometimes different months, but Mardi Gras will happen over X number of weeks. Every year, Jazz Fest, last weekend in April, first weekend in May, it will happen. So you know it's expected and you can plan for it. I love how you thought of the centralized connective of Jazz Fest versus decentralized. And when I think about Mardi Gras and all the different opportunities that we as community members have to participate however we want to participate. Right. And whether it's, I want to be a part right now, believe it or not, y'all, it is only October. Our Mardi Gras does not fall until March. And I see in Audubon Park dancing crews already practicing.
They're rituals.
They're rituals. Yeah. And you have to practice, and you have these choreographed dances and your marchers. And I have so many colleagues. I'm a business professor in other cities. I'm here to tell you, business professors probably wouldn't feel comfortable telling everybody how excited they are to put on a costume and dance down St. Charles Avenue in 6 parades. But here it's like, you go, that is awesome. You get to be a part of a dancing crew. One of our deans, he's no longer there, but I'll never forget this. When he moved to New Orleans, he became a 6'10" stomper. And that became,
which is not easy.
Which is, you really have to try out.
You talk about hard.
You have to try out and learn.
You have to be funny and dance, right?
All these well choreographed dances. It's a big deal to become a 6'10" stomper. And then you march miles and miles and miles in all these different parades. And he was this high level leader at Loyola. And at one of our receptions, I think it was our Christmas reception, he asked everybody, can I bring in a couple 6'10" stompers and dance for you all? I mean, let's just be honest. What other city would a high-level leader at university be at the Christmas party and put on those hysterical outfits and dance? So a couple of things here. Number one, we are very open to creativity in this city and expressing your creativity. So if a dean of a college wants to be a 610 stomper in New Orleans, that's not only okay, I think that's encouraged and accepted. And number two, so that's just one example. We have all these other opportunities. So do you want to be a part of a parade that your dad was a part of? That's a tradition and a ritual. Then you join that parade and you mask up, and that's your part of Mardi Gras. Or I was married to a man who loved New Orleans more than any person really I've ever met besides the daughter that we raised. And he just loved being a bystander.
Yeah.
He didn't want to be a part of anything except for one with the people
Yeah.
on the ground, and he will fight for spears, and he might knock your kid over.
Yeah.
But that was what brought him
But
into
probably on the
it.
same block, or
And
they had his spot, right?
Absolutely. And so you see the same neighbors,
Yeah.
and then all of a sudden you're doing things you probably shouldn't be, like frying shrimp on the parade route.
Have you ever been? I know we live in a neighborhood, but I always am fascinated by Magazine in Jefferson, where parades start, and specifically muses. You ever sat there and watched
it's amazing.
all these different people show up in different costumes all from around the city, and they're sitting there smoking cigarettes, drinking beer, talking, and then the bell rings and they line up and walk down the street. So my question is, why can't other cities do this? No other city in the world has been able to pull off a Mardi Gras where 250 different organizations self-fund themselves and organize in a ritual that attracts millions of people. Why can't other people do this?
I don't know the answer to that.
There's
I do
something in
remember
this.
There's something in this. I do love our police officers at Mardi Gras. They're a part of it. They will dance with you.
Yeah.
I give them hugs at the end of the day. Ask them how I can feed them. They become a part of course, they have to do their jobs and they have to be very vigilant. They also have that celebratory mood. I remember going to Seattle, Washington, had a music festival and kind of the equivalent of a jazz fest. And I remember going there one year, and this police officer came up to me and said, "You can't be drinking that beer." And I was like 28 years old. I said, "Why?" They said, "You have to be in a protected area of a bar and sitting down." And I thought, oh my goodness, that takes away the fun.
Yeah.
And then the very next weekend, I went to Jazz Fest here, and a police officer walked up to me and said, "Are you legal?" And I said, "Oh my gosh, I'm 28 years old. Would you like to see my ID?" And she gave me a 12-pack of beer, and she said, no, I was just checking. I just confiscated this beer from underage kids. Do you mind? Will you drink it? I'm like, this is why New Orleans is. We just somehow get it. Staying within the rules, it's more celebratory.
But I'm going to go one step deeper. Like, think about during the rituals and the rhythms of our seasons. You could be at the grocery store, and wherever you're from in the city or whatever you do, if it's during Mardi Gras, you're talking about Mardi Gras.
You're talking about the king cake. Which
Oh,
king
king
cake
cake.
is your favorite?
Or during Jazz Fest or French Quarter Fest, you're talking about music. Or this summer, we're talking about hurricanes or the Saint season. So somehow we're organized around this rhythm, and whether we like each other or not, we're all thinking
In
and
it
talking and experiencing this
together.
same thing together. What other city does that?
I don't know. And that's the problem.
Detroit
right?
doesn't do that, do they?
I did live in Detroit.
Oh,
I
you
was
did?
a little kid. I lived in the suburbs
But what
of
other
Detroit.
city does this?
I don't know. That is
So what's in
right.
this?
So I think there need to be, we have more festivals than any other city. So there's that. We have so many opportunities for the community to come together that other cities don't have. So I think first you have to have festivals and rituals for a community to come together, and I don't think other cities do.
And why? So why not? We're a 300-year-old city. We're sort of like the big brother or big sister, and the sort of the funky big brother or sister. But what do we do that others can learn from? Because you said this on the panel. You said New Orleans can be the best. So I don't know if there's an answer, but that exploring that question about what is it?
Well,
that we're
I'll
really
give you
good
an
at?
example. I'm on the Super Bowl committee, and we're having this talk as well, is how can the Super Bowl, which is getting hosted in New Orleans in February of this year, and I think we're tied to have hosted the most Super Bowls than any other city. Our slogan is, we're built to host, we
Yep.
can do this. And the Super Bowl is so much more than just a football game. And so we're looking at it as a way to bring an entire region together. So rather than just being on calls, let's get to know one another. This is so much more than just a football
So
game.
events bring people together.
Exactly. Events bring people together, and you have to be very intentional with connection. You can't just fall into that old command and control and do events the way that they used to be done, which is more transactional. Okay, thank you for being a volunteer. Here's what you need to do. No, let's come together. Do y'all know each other? Well, if it's on Zoom, let's form breakouts. Let's get to know each other, make sure we're all have this unified vision and make it fun. I think the fun element is also the secret sauce to what we do. These events and these rituals we have in the city bring out laughter. I believe, Tim, we need more laughter and levity right now than we've ever needed before.
So this week we had some folks from around the world in town. Someone from Finland, and she's asking the question, "What could we learn from New Orleans to bring for Finland?" What would be 3 or 4 things if someone's trying to learn from New Orleans to create a more connected community? What would be 3 or 4 ideas you would give to other communities?
So, number one, take a look at your calendar, because I think that any person or any city, if we look at a person's calendar, it reflects a person's priorities. And are those the true priorities that you want in your life? And if you look at a city at the calendar, does it give your community members opportunities to come together and connect? So number one, let's look at calendars. Number two, I'm assuming that a lot of cities, they don't. And so let's make sure you embed rituals and events that bring people together. And number three, then once you have these events, you need to initiate connection and make sure that people know each other and you're giving them opportunities. Like I mentioned before, it's not just, we're going to have a meeting. Thank you for being a volunteer. And here's what you need to do. Show up. No, it's let's get to know each other first. Let's make sure we're all on the same page and we have the vision. And then let's make it fun, right? I think that's what we do better than other cities. And I think that those skills or those steps, 1, 2, and 3, other cities can employ.
How, like, I've talked to people, I've asked people like about their city, how does the city connect? And people like, oh, we have a rodeo, that's when everybody connects. So we have the music festival.
Great.
And my question is great, but how do you bring everyone together?
Right.
So how do you, the Jazz Fest model is just, you're bringing the blues folks and the gospel folks and the zydeco folks and the jazz folks. These are different, demographics all converge together. And Mardi Gras, all these different crews from 610 stompers to muses to, how do you bring diversity together? How do you connect diversity?
Yeah, so going back to the Super Bowl committee that I'm on, they're doing an incredible job. I'm on the PR committee. So we have these Zooms, right? And then we all got together and we met at the Superdome. And Mike Haas did such, shout out to Mike Haas. He did an incredible job of selling all of us who drove in from all over our region to get a tour of the newly renovated Superdome. And he has such enthusiasm for what we've done in the Superdome to make it such a positive viewing experience, whether you're in a wheelchair on this or whether you're up in the 610 section. And so so you have your volunteers, and then you make sure you embed opportunities to come together and understand the vision, and you're face to face and you meet with one another. So that's why even these, and you can go organizationally, even the companies who are saying, look, our employees still want to work remote. Okay, if you want to stay there, great. And every quarter, you got to bring your people face to face. That's connection. And you have to make sure you give them the opportunities to connect.
I want to go back to the Drew Brees story, that when he sat down at the beginning of the season, and I think he had Marcus Colston and Demario Davis, he had all the different players and free agents and people who are going to get cut, but it doesn't matter. Everyone's at the table. But he shared a collective vision. So what's the role of a collective vision to bring people, to connect people?
That is absolutely imperative. If I believe that we're all leaders, right? No matter the title, we're all leaders.
Say more about it. Before, what do you mean?
Okay, so the book that I'm writing right now, I'm on sabbatical writing my second book called The Seismic Shift in You, with my mentor, Marshall Goldsmith. And he's written 45 books, most of them bestsellers. So this guy knows what he's doing. He's 75 years old. He's incredible. He's a #1 global thought leader, #1 executive coach in the world. He knows what he's doing. And so we believe that leadership really is within. So even if you're an individual contributor, you have to own your ability to connect. You gotta recognize that it's not up to anybody else to create an environment for connection. Connection lies within you. It first lies within the story that you're telling yourself in the script and how you speak to yourself, right? And that affects how you interact with the world. And secondly, you just have so much more influence and control over the energy that you bring to events, right? The language that you use, whether you initiate or you don't. The panel we were talking about that Tim's referring to, I think it was just last week, and it was incredible. It was the launch of season 3 here at New Society. We had an amazing audience. And one of the things when I began my presentation, I said, we have a problem. We are in the middle of an epidemic. 50% of adults are saying they're lonely or disconnected. And I looked out at the audience and I realized that it might not be the people who showed up tonight because they all made the effort to be here.
Yeah.
It's the people who stayed at home, who said, I just really don't have it in me to do it. Those are the people I'm worried about that we really need to help. So when I say leaders are within all of us, is connection starts with you, and you have so much more agency over your life. And we need to help those who are sitting at home and who are not getting off of the sofa. Because what we're finding is they're kind of holding on to their office chairs or their sofas saying, I'm fine, I'm fine, I'm fine, I'm fine, but they're not. We've learned with the pandemic, it's so much worse than we realized. And when humans are isolated and alone, it's bad physically, and it's bad emotionally, and it's bad mentally. So we as a collective group need to help each other get out and connect.
So if I'm one of those people at home, what would be advice? What should I do?
So I think the first step is you just reach out to one person and say you want to have coffee. And then all of a sudden you're in a coffee shop, and then you're around other people, and then you have energy, right? Especially if you're an extrovert, when you're around people, that gives you energy. If you're an introvert, you might need a nap afterwards, right? For the first time being around a bunch of energy. You have to initiate and make it feel safe again. A lot of people are holding on to their comfort and safety at home, not really recognizing how detrimental. First of all, sitting all day long in front of a computer is really unhealthy. We got to get up and move. And to
That's
our
probably
listeners,
clear. That's probably clearly, right?
I mean,
Yeah.
and to our listeners, Tim and I really wanted on this podcast today to do a connection walk. But if you saw what we're staring at, it's kind of a monsoon
A little wet outside, yeah.
It's a little wet outside. One of the things that I'm advocating is, and I just gave a big speech at Auctioner last week, for all of these IS leaders. And IS leaders, they like working behind their computer at home. That's what they do, right? However, this leader, Amy Trainer, is amazing. She's the Chief Information Officer. And every quarter she says, you gotta come together. She removed all cubicles. She created collaborative work environments. She brought in Mrs. Pac-Man, ping pong machines, right? Popcorn, community coffee. And she said, I want you all to be together because I don't know if you realize how much we need each other. So we need leaders and we need people to get out of the habit of just staying at home all day, because it's not good for us.
So back to New Orleans, we're pretty good at getting people to connect, or we have a lot of stuff. What would be your advice to a narrative? I know you're in that committee. How do we communicate? I mean, what would be a way to tell folks about what New Orleans could do around human connection?
You mean tell each other to validate what we're doing, or to share with the rest of the world?
Both.
Either?
Both.
Yeah.
It's actually a both, but it
Yeah,
starts
you're right.
internal.
You know what?
And
You're
then,
right.
and then it
it
goes external. But
cascades.
we got to believe it. So what would be, if you could have everyone in New Orleans together, what would you tell them? How should we feel about ourselves?
I think it's important to have an ambassador, and we chose Drew Brees to be a representative of the energy and the leadership and what it means to be a beautiful connector. So he's actually our ambassador for the Super Bowl. I'm thinking about the Super Bowl right now. And then you have to have a slogan that people really embrace. And so you and I have talked about how New Orleans unlocks creativity and connection better than any other city. And you don't have to say better than any other city. If you're going to do the internal messaging, just say, we as New Orleanians, we unlock creativity and connection. Boom.
So, okay, that's a statement. Is that something you think people would believe that?
I think that if they see it and
Yeah.
you give them enough opportunities to come together, Yes, then they start to believe it, and then you cascade it to
Yeah.
the rest of the world, right? And then that's when Drew Brees is being brought in, and we're going to film and video commercials. And then you stick with New Orleans unlocks creativity and connection better than any other place. Come see what we do. Then you entice others to come see what we do. So yes, you're right. It starts internally. You need a message, a unifying message, hopefully a positive representative like Drew Brees, and then you push it out in the community and in the
That feels
contiguous
like an
states.
umbrella that people come on. Who would disagree, right? And everyone finds a place. What's your hope for New Orleans 5 years from now, 10 years from now? I know your daughter's going to be graduating from college, and we hope she comes back home. But what do you hope and see? And those are two different questions, I know.
And Tim is absolutely right to all of our listeners. I have a junior in college, and as I mentioned earlier, she loves New Orleans more than any person I've ever met who's 20. And she would love to come back to this city. And right now, she's looking at job opportunities. And she said, Mom, there aren't many Fortune 500 companies in
Nope.
New Orleans. I said, No, there aren't. We just have Entergy, right?
Yeah.
And we only have two billionaires, Todd Graves, who's in my book, who's the founder of Raising Cane's, and then Gail Benson, and I run her Leadership Academy.
Yeah.
So we have two billionaires. So we don't exactly have the economic base, but Tim, what you're doing with the new society is you're giving us a place and a forum, and it's a collection of people who want to do great things and want to talk about great ideas and want and have fallen in love. And that's what I learned at the panel last week. The audience members all have fallen for this city.
Yeah.
And not many of them are originally from
No,
here.
no.
They've chosen to come here.
And they have fresh
because
eyes.
They have fresh eyes and fresh perspectives. And so, what do I see for the future in 5 years? I want others to choose to move to New Orleans because it's something special when it comes to creativity and connection.
Pitch your book real quickly. I read that Seismic Shift. Why should I read? Why should someone read it?
So I was so blessed. I was on the forefront of seeing a seismic shift as an executive coach. I was coaching a bunch of leaders of a certain age and leaders who had been trained under the old Jack Welch, GE, command and control, culture of fear. Those leaders were getting pushed out of organizations right in front of my eyes. No matter how much I was helping them, if they weren't adapting, and I didn't know yet what it was, but if they weren't adapting to figuring out how to lead a younger generation that didn't want to be yelled at and didn't want to be scared to go to work every day, right? Those leaders were getting pushed out. And then I was seeing leaders like Pete November, who I was coaching, who's now the CEO of Ochsner, and he would say, Michelle, I don't want to lead like some of the leaders that I'm seeing. I want this to be a conversation. I want us to create collaborative teams. I want people to take risks. And so I'm in all of his team meetings seeing a very different type of leadership, and I'm watching him get promoted.
Yeah.
And so now he's the CEO of our largest employer in the state of Louisiana, which is Ochsner Health. And so I was so blessed. This was probably in 2018 to realize that there was a seismic shift happening and leaders needed to become really, really good at connection. And so I realized at that point I had to write a book and get it out there. It was not something that was like, oh, one day I'm going to write a book. No, it was one of these kind of lightning moments like, holy smokes, I need to document this and help as many people as I can. Because what I found is some of those leaders who were very much creating cultures of fear, it started with themselves. They weren't connected with themselves, and they were trying to be perfect. And they were, and so because they were trying to be perfect, they demanded perfection, and then it just created this toxic culture, and people were leaving left and right. And so I wanted to make sure that people knew that connection is so much easier. It's easier to connect with your team and others when you truly are connected with yourself. And you show up authentically, and it's okay to make mistakes, and let's have a conversation. Connection requires reciprocity. Don't just show up and tell everybody what they should do and need to do and talk more. Let's listen more and create commonality and collaboration through connection. And that's what I wrote my book about.
And I love my 3 list, but 3 ways to connect with yourself. What could one do? How do you do that?
So first you have to own your story. And it's interesting that, and I'll be very vulnerable, Tim. I remember reading, I love Brene Brown and her research, and I remember reading her book, the gifts of imperfection. And she said, if you don't own your story's going to own you. So there are lots of people who just don't feel comfortable with maybe who they are, how they were raised. They feel a little bit of shame, of course, like my dad grew up super, super poor, and my dad became super successful. And I think one of the reasons why is because he never ran away from the fact that he remembers vividly tearing apart a chair in his kitchen to put in the fireplace to keep the family warm at night. And he was able to tell the story, not from a victim mentality, but like, and this is why I work so hard every day, because I know what it's like to be poor, and I'm not going to be that again. And I accept where I was because it motivates me to be who I am today. So he did a great job. He was a wonderful example of owning. He's still alive today and is an amazing leader. And he owned his story. Those who don't own their story, they come across as kind of fake and inauthentic, and then people don't trust them, and those are leaders that get pushed out of the organization. So number one, own your story. Number two, stop trying to be perfect. There were leaders that I would
That might
see,
make people feel good. I don't have to be perfect.
oh
Right?
my gosh, there were leaders I would see that they couldn't have a hair out of place. And their teeth were so white and their shoes were so polished. And every time they got up in front of an audience, and you're like, come on, dude, that's great and all, but you gotta be real and imperfect. And that's one of the reasons why I love New Orleans is it's actually not cool here to be perfect. And it's not cool to be a cookie cutter.
Yeah,
You're-
hold on.
it's
We're
at
not
all.
perfect. We're not perfect. Yeah.
We're so not perfect. Exactly. Okay, so number two, you've got to give up perfection. And then number three, you got to kind of own your superpowers. You got to figure out, like, think about if you're not really good at seeing what you're good at, think about how you've been complimented. What have people said? And I can tell you all about Tim. Tim, to me, has always been such a visionary and stimulating. And I've always loved having conversations with Tim. So for you, it's really embracing, okay, so I know that I'm a visionary and I know that I like to have stimulating conversations and lean in with those gifts and those strengths and don't shy away from it. Right? For years, I'll give you an example of me. For years, I would be told by my students, very enthusiastic. And I would think, okay, well, but I didn't see that as a strength. I thought, oh gosh, business professors are not supposed to be as excited as I am. Maybe, I don't know. And so for years, I tried to be somebody I wasn't. I tried to be really stern and super serious. And so I suppressed these natural qualities that I had. And guess what? It didn't work at all. So leaders, in order to connect with themselves, they need to embrace, like, hey, here are my gifts and here's what I'm good at, and I need to lean in with those.
So what was that process to find your superpower?
Oh my gosh, it took me years, Tim. Years, because I
That's
just
why you
was
walk around the
so-
park?
Yes,
No, I mean, no,
exactly.
how does one find their superpower?
So you have to have, not have to have, one of the things for me is I had a really good boss who said, Michelle, why are you trying to be this person when you're so this person? Can you look at all of these student evaluations? They actually say it's a good thing that even though you drive them crazy at 8 a.m. because you're way too excited, they want to come to class because you're excited about the work that you do. So stop suppressing that. So sometimes, again, I was so young. I started off as an MBA professor at 27. I didn't even have my PhD yet. I was ABD. And so I think I felt like I had a lot to prove. And so I was trying to be this person that I wasn't, right? And sometimes it takes a really good boss who is a servant leader who says, I'm here to develop you and let me tell you what I see your strengths are. Because sometimes it's hard to see our strengths.
So I feel like we're rounding the corner, approaching for Tanya, probably where we break off. One last question: does New Orleans, and back to the question, does New Orleans allow people to find their superpower?
Oh, heck yes. So
Is that what Mardi Gras is? You can
yes,
be.
exactly. I dedicated my book. I dedicated my book to the city of New Orleans, where you don't have to be perfect, because I had lived in all these suburbs growing up. We moved every 2 years. My dad was really good with GMAC, and when you were really good in your job back then, they promoted you every 2 years, and you had to leave the market. You could not You could not lead the people you had been peers of. In any case, I don't think they're using that model today. So we moved every 2 years in all these suburbs. And what I found is that in the end of the day, everybody looked alike. They all looked alike. They wore the same clothes, the same hats, drove the same cars. They acted the same. And then I came to New Orleans and I couldn't find anybody who looked like anybody else. Everybody was an individual, and it was like, and creative. And yeah, so I think in New Orleans, and maybe that's another one of the best practices that we can share when we go on the road to help other cities, right? Is it's actually so much cooler to be yourself.
And this city allows you to be yourself.
And
And doesn't allow you to find your superpower.
yes, it allows
Dancing down the street in
and
a
it's
blue
welcome.
shorts, right?
The Elvi, the rolling Elvi.
That's your
Who
super-
else has rolling Elvi?
But is back to say, is it unlocking human creativity or is it unlocking your superpower?
It's, I think, a little bit of both.
Michelle, this has been wonderful. Is there any final thoughts that you love as we're now untying our shoelaces and getting our water? Any last thing you'd like for people to think
I
about?
just want to encourage, just because I'm deep into the research of connection, and I'm so passionate that this is the antidote to loneliness. And so I just encourage anyone who's listening, who is just right now on a, whatever day you're going to listen to this, like, I just don't want to get out of the house. It's just safer to stay inside or more comfortable. Please do me a favor and just initiate that one coffee. Reach out to the one person you haven't talked to in a while. Maybe just have a conversation.
Walk around the park.
Walk around the park and see people. We need connection more than we ever thought we needed it right now.
Michelle, thank you so much.
Thank you so much,
I
Tim.
can't wait to see you in the park and come up with something else.
Keep going. Yes, thank you so much to all of your listeners.
All
Thank
right.
you for having me.
Thank you. Have a great day.
You too. Bye.